Grace Whitmore held the envelope in her trembling hands, staring at the gold letters that screamed celebration, while her stomach sank into an old, familiar dread. Hawthorne Ridge High, 10-year reunion. The paper smelled expensive, like perfume and polished wood, and it pulled her back to a time she had tried to bury under years of survival. For a moment, she was 17 again, standing in the hallway with a thrift store sweater, hearing laughter bounce off lockers like bullets. She was the girl they called the class loser, the one teachers pitied and students used as entertainment. The one who ate lunch alone, who wore the same shoes too long, who pretended not to hear the whispers about her mother's addictions and her father's disappearance. 10 years later, the words still burned, not because she believed them anymore, but because her body remembered what it felt like to be small. And if you're watching this and you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of rising above cruelty, please take a second to like this video, comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this remind us that hearts can heal and lives can change. Grace didn't need to open the invitation to know what it said. She had already seen the reunion page online, the smiling faces of people who had made her high school life feel like a punishment. She remembered their names like Scars, Madison Cole, the queen of fake smiles, Trevor Hanks, the loud one who always needed an audience, Brianna Shaw, who laughed even when she wasn't sure what the joke was, and Caleb Knox, who once had been kind in 9th grade, before popularity taught him to be silent. They had grown into adults with careers, families, and perfectly filtered photos. Grace had grown too, but not in ways the internet would have understood. She had grown in silence, in late-night tears, in prayers whispered into cracked pillows, in the heavy work of becoming someone new without anyone clapping for her. She almost threw the invitation away. She had a life now in Chicago, a small apartment that smelled like vanilla candles and fresh laundry, a schedule full of meetings, and a phone that never stopped buzzing. She had built her peace carefully, like a fragile glass house, and she didn't want those people stepping inside it. But curiosity tugged at her like an old chain, not because she missed them, but because part of her still wanted to prove something, not to them, but to the girl she used to be. The girl who cried in bathroom stalls and asked God why she was born into a life nobody wanted. Grace had been raised in a small town in Ohio where everyone knew everyone's business and judged it like sport. Her childhood had been made of eviction notices, unpaid bills, and a mother who loved her but couldn't love sobriety more. Grace learned early how to become invisible. She learned how to walk softly, how to apologize for existing, how to make herself smaller so the world would stop hitting her. In school, she became an easy target. She wasn't loud. She wasn't pretty in the way the popular girls were pretty. She didn't have money for dances or cheerleading or new phones. She had dreams, though, quiet dreams she kept hidden, like a candle in a storm. In her senior year, the worst humiliation happened. Someone had made a fake most likely to fail award and handed it to her in front of the cafeteria. The whole room laughed. Teachers pretended not to see. Grace remembered gripping the paper so hard it tore, then walking home in the cold while snow fell like ashes. That night she sat beside her mother's sleeping form and made a promise to God with a shaking voice. If he gave her a way out, she would never waste it. After graduation, she didn't go to college like the others. She couldn't afford it. She worked at a diner, then a grocery store, then a warehouse. She took night classes at a community college, sometimes falling asleep over textbooks with tears drying on her cheeks. She fought for every inch of progress while her classmates posted photos from spring break trips and dorm parties. Some nights she felt like she was running on faith alone, but faith, she learned, could be stronger than any insult. Grace eventually earned a scholarship after submitting an essay about resilience. She transferred to a university in Illinois and studied business and logistics. She didn't have connections. She didn't have privilege. She had grit. She graduated at the top of her class, then got hired by a shipping company where she worked her way up faster than anyone expected. People underestimated her at first because she was quiet, because she didn't brag. They didn't understand that quiet didn't mean weak. Quiet meant focused. By 27, Grace had done something that felt unreal even to her. She founded her own company, a logistics and emergency supply network that helped deliver critical resources during storms and disasters. She worked with organizations that brought food to families, medicine to rural clinics, and supplies to shelters. She wasn't famous in a celebrity way, but she was powerful in the way that mattered, the kind of power that lifted others instead of crushing them. She never forgot where she came from. And she never forgot the girl who had been mocked. So when the reunion invitation sat on her kitchen counter, Grace finally made a decision that surprised even her. She was going to go. Not to prove she was better than them, not to rub success in their faces, but to close a chapter that still lived inside her like unfinished grief. She wanted to walk into that room and not feel afraid. She wanted to breathe the same air as her past and realize it couldn't hurt her anymore. The reunion was held at a country club back in Ohio, the kind with chandeliers and valet parking and a fountain that glittered under spotlights. Grace didn't drive there. She didn't even fly commercial. On the day of the reunion, she stepped onto a private helipad in Chicago with her hair neatly pinned back and her hands steady. The helicopter blades began to spin, roaring like thunder, and for a moment she felt the weight of the past fall away like dust. She wasn't that girl anymore. She was still Grace, still humble, still soft-hearted, but she was no longer small. As the helicopter rose, the city shrinking below her, Grace looked out at the sky and whispered a prayer, not for revenge, but for strength. She didn't know what kind of cruelty waited for her, because people who mock rarely change, they just get older. She had seen enough of life to know that some adults still carried high school inside them like a disease. But she also knew something else. God didn't bring her this far to let her be broken by people who never mattered. When the helicopter finally descended near Hawthorne Ridge, the reunion guests were already arriving. Cars lined the entrance, laughter spilled into the night, and the country club glowed like a jewel. Nobody expected a helicopter. The sound drew attention instantly, turning heads, pausing conversations. People shaded their eyes as if trying to understand what was happening. Then the helicopter landed smoothly, and the doors opened. Grace stepped out. She didn't step out like a movie star, she stepped out like someone who had survived. She wore a simple, elegant dress and a coat that fit perfectly. Her posture was calm, her face was peaceful. She wasn't there to perform. She was there to reclaim. A hush rolled through the crowd. The whispers began immediately, but this time they weren't cruel. They were confused, fascinated, unsettled. People looked at Grace as if she were a ghost returning with proof that the story they wrote about her had been wrong. Inside the ballroom, the decorations were loud with nostalgia. Banners, old photos, yearbooks on tables. Grace walked past them slowly, her eyes catching images of the past. Football games, prom nights, smiling faces. She saw herself in one corner of a photo, half cut off, like she barely existed. It made her chest tighten, but she kept walking. Madison Cole spotted her first. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, like her mind was racing to regain control. Trevor Hanks stared openly, almost offended that Grace had arrived with such a statement. Brianna Shaw's smile froze halfway. And Caleb Knox. Caleb looked like he'd seen something holy and heartbreaking at the same time. He looked away, as if ashamed. Grace moved through the room with quiet grace, accepting greetings, shaking hands, hearing forced compliments. People asked where she lived now, what she did, how she came by helicopter. Some tried to laugh it off, as if it was all just a funny surprise. But Grace could feel the truth underneath. They were uncomfortable. Because her presence rewrote their old narrative. If the class loser could rise, then what did that say about them? Then it happened. Madison, still hungry for power, still addicted to being the center, raised her voice near a group so others would hear. She made a joke about how Grace must have won the lottery or married rich. Laughter followed, but it was thinner than it used to be. Forced, nervous. Madison's eyes glittered with the same cruelty Grace remembered from high school. Grace felt her heartbeat rise, but she didn't shrink. She didn't blush. She didn't run. She smiled softly, and that smile carried 10 years of pain transformed into peace. She didn't need to insult Madison. She didn't need to fight. She simply stood in the truth. She calmly explained that she built a company from nothing, that she worked through school, that she now helped deliver supplies during disasters, and that she came by helicopter because she had meetings early the next morning in another state. Her voice was steady like still water. No arrogance, no bitterness, just reality. The room shifted. People stopped pretending. Some looked stunned, some looked inspired, some looked embarrassed. A few, for the first time in their lives, saw Grace as a full human being, not a joke, not a rumor, not a target, a person. Grace walked to the table where the school had set up a memory wall, where guests could write notes about their favorite high school moments. She picked up a pen. For a moment, her hand hovered, and her mind flashed with memories, being shoved in the hallway, being laughed at, being alone. She could have written something sharp, something that would have cut, something that would have earned applause. Instead, she wrote something that healed. She wrote that she forgave them, that she hoped they grew kinder, that life was too short to carry cruelty, that God could turn ashes into beauty. Then she stepped back and let the ink dry like a blessing. Caleb Knox approached later, his face tight with regret. He didn't speak in dramatic words. He simply looked at her with wet eyes and nodded, as if saying sorry without a voice. Grace nodded back, not because he deserved it, but because she deserved peace. As the night continued, something unexpected happened. People started coming to Grace quietly, one by one. Not the loud ones, not the cruel ones, the ones who had watched and done nothing, the ones who had laughed nervously to fit in. They told her they were sorry. They told her they remembered. They admitted they admired her strength. Some even cried. Grace listened with a calm heart, realizing that her victory wasn't the helicopter, or the success, or the money. Her victory was that she had become someone who could stand in a room full of her past and not be haunted. Near the end of the night, the reunion organizer asked Grace to take a photo with the class. They lined up under the banner, smiling. Grace stood in the center, not because she demanded it, but because people made room for her without even realizing. The girl who used to be invisible was now impossible to ignore. But what mattered most wasn't the photo. It was what happened afterward. Grace walked outside alone for a moment, letting the cool night air touch her skin. She looked up at the stars above Ohio, the same stars she used to stare at through a broken window when she felt trapped. She remembered the girl she was, tired, poor, mocked, praying. And she felt tears rise, not from pain but from gratitude. She realized something that made her chest ache in the best way. Her life was proof that God listens. Not always quickly, not always easily, but faithfully. If this story is touching your heart right now, please don't just watch silently. Tap like, leave a comment, share this video, and subscribe. You never know who's watching while feeling like Grace once felt, and your engagement could help this message reach them. And before the ending, I have a special request for you. Comment "I will rise" if you believe no one has the right to define your worth. Grace returned inside and made one last announcement, not as a show, but as a gift. She revealed that she had quietly funded a scholarship at Hawthorne Ridge High for students who came from struggling homes, students who worked jobs, who felt invisible, who needed a chance. She didn't attach her name to it for attention. She attached it because she wanted someone else to escape the way she did. The room went silent again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was reverence. Madison's face changed, not with jealousy, but with something close to shame. Trevor looked down. Brianna wiped her eyes. Caleb pressed his lips together as if holding back tears. The air felt different, like something holy had entered it, like forgiveness had weight. When Grace finally left, the helicopter waited with its lights glowing softly. She climbed in without looking back. Not because she hated them, but because she didn't belong to that pain anymore. The blade spun again, lifting her into the sky, and the country club grew smaller beneath her, like a memory finally losing its power. Up above the town, Grace closed her eyes and breathed. She wasn't the class loser. She never was. She was a survivor, a builder. A woman God carried through fire and turned into light. And somewhere, in that same town, maybe a quiet kid would one day hear about the scholarship and realize they weren't doomed. Maybe they'd realize they could rise too. Because the truth is, the people who mock you don't get to write your ending. God does.